Thank you, ASU, for organizing this. I want to do just a special mention, very short, to Nicole Macias, who's have been on the forefront of this. Thank you to Grupo Editorial Planeta, the publisher of Jorge Ramos. And I have to give a special thank you to Gilberto Lopez from the Transborder School of ASU. Where is Gilberto? Gilberto was the one who encouraged me to do this event here. Okay. So I'm not going to go long because we want to be al punto, right? We're living through really unprecedented times, and so this crucial moment needs our attention. And this moment, this 60-plus minutes we're going to have, need our attention. I mean, there has been so many things going on in the last 90 days. Executive orders in the hundreds numbers, tariff, immigration rates, many factors that we need to pay attention to what we're talking today. And the way, I organized this event, the title, Truths Across Borders, is mainly to focus on not only the geographical territory of borders, but the border of language, the border of culture. And here we have the luxury of having the two most fearless voices that journalism has in the United States, Jorge Ramos and Marty. As you know, the entire world is watching the direction this country is going. And so before starting, let me ask some of you, all of you in the audience, because we want to get to know you very fast. How many of you, raise your hands, are baby boomers, born before 1964?
Claro.
Okay. How about Generation X, 1965, 1980? Okay. Rico, you're... Okay. Okay. Millennials, 1986, 1990. Okay, so we have a pretty... How about Generation Z, born after 1997? Okay, so we have a really... a reflection of how the country is going. I'll ask you another quick question. How many of you speak Spanish? Marty, do you speak Spanish?
He does.
You didn't just raise your hand. Okay.
He does, actually. You're gonna hear him.
How many of you speak good Spanish? All right.
Spanglish.
How many of you have pets? No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So let's start with a personal question to get to know our two guests before we jump into El Punto. Marty, ¿a qué edad y por qué decidiste aprender español?
Bueno, lo empecé a estudiar hace muchos años, en los años 90. Y yo tenía unos 40 años de edad. Y empecé a estudiar porque estaba viviendo en el sur de California. Había visto la ola de inmigración en el sur de California y antes en el sur de Florida, donde yo trabajaba antes. Y yo quería tener la capacidad de comunicarme con la gente en la calle. Yo quería tener la capacidad de escuchar las emisoras de radio y ver las noticias en la televisión para enterarme de lo que estaba ocurriendo en la comunidad. Entonces empecé a estudiar para dominar el idioma y yo fui a México para estudiar, a Costa Rica y a Guatemala, y cuando me hice director del Miami Herald en el año 2000, sentí la necesidad de estudiar con más intensidad. Entonces yo fui a España, en la ciudad de Sevilla, para estudiar, y sigo estudiando con un profesor en el norte de España, en Asturias ahora, en línea.
the importance of having this event with Marty Barron and you guys understanding the level of the Spanish he speaks, I can assure you this is not fact-checked, but he's the only Anglo-American that I have seen with a high-caliber position of executive editors in different media outlets that speak Spanish, being an Anglo-native. So we have a CEO of NBC who is Latino, we have a San Francisco Chronicle who is also Hispanic, but this means a lot. Jorge, when you came to this country in the early 80s, there was a similar situation of the flow of immigrants coming to the US, in the millions coming through the border of Mexico. Why don't you tell our audience how did you come in, and why did you decide to migrate to the US?
Yeah, yo no quería ser un inmigrante. I didn't want to be an immigrant. I would have loved to stay in Mexico, but I just simply couldn't stay in Mexico. Back then, I started working in a radio station. And then I moved to a TV station. And when I was very young, I was given the opportunity to become a reporter. So when I was doing reports about electricity and local news, there was no problem. But at some point, I believed, con muchísima ingenuidad, that I could do a story about el dedazo. You know what el dedazo is, no? When a president in Mexico, back then, in the 1980s, there was no democracy in Mexico. And back then, the president in power would choose with his dedo, with his finger, who would replace him. So I thought it was a great story for TV, and I started doing all the reporting. I included Carlos Monsiváis, Elena Poniatowska, and then when I tried to put that on the air, they said, no, we cannot talk about this, censorship. All right, so they asked me to rewrite my story. I did it. They still didn't like it. And there's a red line as a journalist. At that point, I realized I couldn't stay in Mexico and I just didn't want to be a censored journalist. So I sold mi bochito. Era un carro rojo, un Volkswagen rojo que me dieron un poco de dinero. And with that money, I came to the United States as a student. What I found really interesting is that back then, here in the United States. And by the way, I came here on January 2nd, 1983. And I'm sure all immigrants, we all remember when we come to this country, exactly the day and how it happened. Even with some Hollywood music behind, no? I still remember walking. Listen, everything that I own, a suitcase, unos papeles, documents, and my guitar, everything I could carry with me. So the sense of freedom was incredible. And what amazed me is that when I first came, everybody was criticizing President Ronald Reagan, and I found that amazing. I mean, I came from a country that was not possible to criticize the president, and here you have everybody criticizing Ronald Reagan, and nothing happened. The journalists could go to the supermarket, they could take a bike ride, and nothing happened. So that's why I love the United States. And now that we're going to be talking about that later, but now that we have a similar situation in which journalists are being attacked and criticized. I mean, I left Mexico for that. I'm not going to allow that to happen as a journalist here in the United States.
Okay, well, enough about questions and answers, and we're going to start a conversation here. So forget about being you, Jorge, interviewing Marty, and you, Marty, interviewing Jorge. This is a conversation with everybody, and everybody, including you, wants to learn from him, and him wants to learn from you, and we all want to learn from both of you. So let's go to the point, and let me tell, especially the young crowd over here, that what we're living now, it's very disruptive and very, demanding, but these two guests that we have here have also lived some moments that are very similar. At least in the risk of your careers, or the risk of even your staying in working as a journalist, and you succeeded. So I want to give just a particular example. I'm going to start with you, Jorge. Let's go back to the 80s again. And I remember when doing my investigation about your career, when you started, there was a sentiment of anti-Mexican sentiment in Florida, where you actually were working when you became a national reporter, an anchor. you were moved to Miami from California. And in Florida, there was a anti-Mexican sentiment, and I want Jorge to explain why. But then in California, there was an anti-Cuban sentiment too. The Cubanization of university. There was a time when they were saying that the university is being Cuban, becoming Cuban. And at the same time, there was a huge movement in the US against the use of Spanish. So this is not the first time that we're being told, don't speak Spanish. So why don't you tell us about that experience, those moments?
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult. Reporting in Spanish was, it's not that it was not accepted, it was simply difficult. And I still remember about this anti-Mexican sentiment in Florida, simply because of the fact that I was from Mexico, and back then the Mexican government was supporting the dictatorship in Cuba. We were all communists. So yo era un comunista mexicano en la Florida, en Miami. And what I tell a lot of people when they say, no, es que tú eres comunista. No, I'm not a communist. I'm simply a journalist asking questions. And said, how can I be a communist and then interview Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, Nicolás Maduro, he detained me and deported me from Venezuela. I'm not a communist. Say, no. Others are saying, no, you're an activist from the CIA. But what do you mean? Did you see my interview with my confrontation with Donald Trump? Mm-hmm. And do you think someone from the CIA would do something like that?
We'll talk about that later too.
Yeah, or with
false flag operation, right?
Exactly. Yeah, or with former President Salinas de Gortari in Mexico. So it's whenever, I mean, you can help me here, but whenever people criticize you, the first thing they say as a journalist, oh no, you're not a journalist, you're an activist, you know?
Yeah, well, I think people always impute motives to us because of the questions we asked. I mean, you have to ask the hard questions. They assume if you're asking the hard questions, you must be on the opposite side. So people make a lot of assumptions about journalists and who we are and why we're asking those questions and why we're pursuing the stories that we are. And most of those assumptions are incorrect.
Yeah, and I think we have two main responsibilities. First, to report reality as it is, not as we wish it would be. But the second most important one, the social one, has to do with challenging and questioning those who are in power. And if we don't do both, I don't think we're doing real journalism, no?
Yeah, you know, I always remind people of the First Amendment and who wrote it. It was James Madison. He was the principal author of the First Amendment. And when he was talking about it, he talked about the need for freely examining public characters and measures. So public characters being politicians and government officials, people with power, measures being the policies that affect the lives of ordinary people. Free, I hope we understand that word. Examining, I think, is the word that we want to focus on. And that means we're supposed to be looking behind the curtain and beneath the surface. That's the idea. We're not stenographers. We're not activists, but we're journalists. We're independent journalists asking the questions that people need to know and fulfilling our mission as journalists to give the public the information that it needs and deserves to know in order to govern themselves.
Marty, hold on one second. Before we keep talking about the activism and our profession, I also want Marty to narrate what happened to you in 2009. You were the executive editor of the Boston Globe, very important news company in Massachusetts, in New England. And the owner at that time was the New York Times. And guess what? New York Times was struggling financially. The Boston Globe was also struggling financially. And the New York Times decided to shut down the Boston Globe. Not many people know that the order was to shut down the Boston Globe, unless they have to reduce the payroll, 20% of, more or less 20% of the organization. You were the executive editor. So give us an idea of that, drastic moment in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that would be mi legado, my legacy. I thought that I would be known forever as the editor who oversaw the Boston Globe when it got shut down. The New York Times was threatening to shut it down because we were losing something like $80 million a year. It's a lot of money for a paper of that size, or any size, as a matter of fact. And so You know, it was tough because the company was asking the staff to give up 20% of their compensation, 20% of their compensation, one way or another. And as you might imagine, the unions at the Globe at the time were not happy about that. And there were many protests in front of the building, an inflatable rat, things like that, deep resentments against management, and I was a member of management, although I had nothing to do with that decision. I only found out about it. I wasn't even in town when they announced that, when they disclosed that to the union. I was in Oregon, as a matter of fact, at the time, and it was dismaying. But I think the important lesson here is that, and we were having this discussion earlier in a class, is that there are moments of great struggle in anybody's career. That was one for me. I mean, at the beginning of my career, I thought about quitting because I was not happy with the work that I was doing, and I was working all the time. I remember another candidate for a job asking me to be my colleague there. He said, well, what do you do in your spare time? I said, I do my laundry. That was my job at the time. I worked 6 days a week producing 2-3 stories a day. It was exhausting. And I was thinking, well, I can't do this for the rest of my life. But it wasn't the rest of my life. It was just the first job. It's not the last job. And so there are these moments of struggle. And certainly in 2009 at the Boston Globe, that was an enormous moment of struggle for me. I decided to stick it out. The staff stuck it out. The paper turned around. And now, as far as I know, it's a profitable regional newspaper, one of the most successful in the country right now, and continuing to do really excellent journalism. So keep in mind the long run.
Thank you. So it's not that I don't want you to applaud, but let's keep it short because we need to keep talking. Let's go back to the that ongoing debate of being a journalist could also be inclined to be an activist. And I really love to go to the history of our country, of the US, and how these things has happened in the past, and how both perspective of working for the community and informing sometimes clash. In the year 2000, yes, 1999, 2000, I'm pretty sure some of you will remember this. There was a huge, very famous case of Elián González, a kid who arrived in Miami. His mom died, drowned in the ocean in his trip to Miami. And there was suddenly a huge controversy because the community in the US, specifically the Cuban Hispanic community, wanted the kid to stay in the US with some relatives in Miami. And the Bill Clinton administration decided to send him to his father back to Cuba because the father was also asking for his reunite with his son. At that time, Jorge was in Univision News in Miami. Marty was the executive editor of the Miami Herald. So please, share with us, both of you, your perspective, your experiences, and what was happening at that moment.
It was a very difficult, tense moment, right?
Incredibly difficult. The community was completely divided between Cuban Americans and so-called Anglos, which is the term that's used in Miami.
And you remember that the picture that probably summarizes everything? It was, you published it, no?
There was a picture of a border agent holding a high-powered rifle, and this guy who was hanging out with Elián's family was holding Elián in his arms in the closet, and it looked like the border agent was pointing the gun at Elián.
Yeah, what I didn't know, and we had this conversation just a couple of hours ago, is that picture you are saying does not reflect exactly what was happening.
No, it doesn't. It's not a well-known story, and it hasn't gotten a lot of attention. But if you actually look at it was once published, the entire sequence of photos, because photographers just take one photo after the next. And so if you watch the entire sequence, as soon as that border agent saw Elián in the arms of this guy, he immediately lowered his gun. But the only picture that circulated was the one where it looked like he was pointing the gun, the high-powered weapon, at Elián.
It was just like a moment, because
it was
after
just
that
1 second. It was like 1 second. And that was the picture that went all over the world. That was the picture that was on the front of the Miami Herald, on the front of El Nuevo Herald, the Spanish language paper that was.
And Jorge,
and they look. I mean, to talk about the divisions in the community, the difference between how we at the Miami Herald covered that story and the way that El Nuevo covered that story. When there was a raid to recover Elián and deliver him to his father, who was then waiting in Washington.
And then go back, both of them.
And then go back to Cuba. But the headline in the Miami Herald was we had seized. We had the famous picture, and then we had a picture of Elián in the arms of his dad. And the headline in El Nuevo Herald was "Qué vergüenza." Now you can imagine which paper was more popular.
We're talking the same owner of El Nuevo Herald and the Miami Herald, both covers with different perspectives.
I'll let you guess which newspaper was more popular at the time in Miami.
Yeah, but what I find really interesting is the importance of Spanish language. Because, I mean, again, when I got here in 1983, there were only 15 million Latinos. Right now, there are 65 million Latinos. And especially in Florida, the importance of those who were speaking Spanish was being completely felt in the news media.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I asked my publisher, Alberto Ibargüen, at the time, and I said, how can they run a headline like "Qué vergüenza"? And he said, dos periódicos, dos puntos de vista.
and what type of pressure do you receive from the audience in regards to that different perspective from the
No, I mean, you were constantly feeling the pressure from the community because they wanted to be represented in such an important news, especially in dealing with the dictatorship in Cuba.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because we would run a story. I mean, at the time we had those phones where if you had a message, it had a little light on it that told you had a message and you had to call into things. So we would run a story at the Miami Herald, and I would get calls from Anglos in the community who were saying the Miami Herald was just trying to pander to the Cuban community. And then regarding the same story, I would get calls from people in the Cuban community who said that I was biased against the Cuban community reading the very same story. The divisions were immense. And I remember one of the people in our staff who was writing the lead-all, the main story every single day. He was watching the TVs, and it was a protest of older Cuban Americans in Miami, and I think they were on Calle Ocho. And at some point he just said, "Qué locos," and it was like a bonfire in our newsroom. I mean, we had a lot of Cuban Americans in our staff. They were outraged because using the word "loco" is like setting a match to gasoline. And anyway, I had to go around, and he said, and he's Puerto Rican American. So I had to go to every department and tell them that this was a highly sensitive story, and we could not be, and he told me, he said, I was just joking. I was just, it was just off the cuff joking. And I went to every department. I said, we cannot joke on this story. It's so sensitive in this community. We cannot have any jokes. And then the word spread around the newsroom that Marty has issued instructions that we will never tell jokes in this newsroom ever again.
And at the end, guess who won the Pulitzer for that story? The English-speaking media or the Spanish-speaking media? Miami Herald.
Yeah, well, there weren't that many Hispanos on the Pulitzer committee, by the way. But just to be honest, forthright about it. But yeah, we did win a Pulitzer for the raid to recover Elián González, mainly because we did an amazingly great reconstruction of how that played out that day. We didn't just cover the raid. We went back and investigated how the decision was made in Washington, how it played out on the ground in Miami at the home where Elián was being kept. And we played out the entire, it was a total, detailed, gripping reconstruction of the day.
We're not criticizing why you won the Pulitzer. But
I'm just explaining. I think I understand. I just want to explain why you win a Pulitzer Prize, because you go deeper than everybody else.
And I also like the opportunity to say there have never been a Hispanic news outlet winning a Pulitzer. There have never been a Pulitzer won by a Hispanic media. It's about time, huh? So let's go to the topic of activism. Let's go back to the activism, because it is really a matter of credibility in journalism. So why don't you share your thoughts about how to draw the line here. Because right now, especially, we Hispanic media outlets out there, we are the voice of many people. Many people reach, I'm pretty sure, Jorge, tell me if I'm not wrong, will come to you to talk about their legal problems or their immigration topics before going to the authorities. They will come to the Hispanic media. So where do we draw the line of becoming or being an activist as a journalist and also as a media outlet? Because some people think that it could damage the credibility of journalism. And we are living times right now that this is a very important topic to discuss.
Yeah, throughout the day, we've had many conversations with students and professors here at the university. And they were asking me what happened in 2015 with Donald Trump. And remember back then, he was saying that Mexican immigrants were criminals and rapists. Well, he was absolutely wrong. I am a Mexican immigrant, and we're not criminals, and we're not rapists. And when he said that, I thought it was my responsibility not only to report about what other Latinos were saying, but to confront Donald Trump. Should we do that as journalists? That has been the question. So what I did is what anybody would have done back then. I wrote a handwritten letter to Donald Trump. I sent a FedEx to New York, and instead of he responding, he published my letter with my cell phone number on it on Instagram. Wow. Okay, so I got hundreds and hundreds of calls, many of them asking for jobs, some of them. That is true. Not only I had to change my number, but people wanted just to sing with Don Francisco and Sábado Gigante, things like that. So some of them were threatening emails and texts, but I would say half of them were just looking for a job or something like that. Anyway, so I just continued doing that, and I'll go back to activism versus journalism. We found out that Donald Trump was going to give a press conference in Dubuque, Iowa, and so we went to Dubuque, Iowa, but we prepared everything.
Dubuque, Iowa? Who knows where is that place?
Exactly.
1, 2, 3.
Well, that's precisely the point. We thought not a lot of journalists were going to be in Dubuque. And then we brought 3 cameras. We brought our microphones because I wanted just to make sure that our voice was going to be listened at the same point, at the same level. We realized that asking a question like this is different than asking a question like this, right? It feels completely different. It's just simply body language. And at the end, there was a press conference in Dubuque, Iowa. There was a pause, and I stood up and asked my questions. He just didn't want to answer my questions, so he called a bodyguard with a very strange way of moving his lips, and it looked like a kiss to the bodyguard. And the bodyguard, he was taller than me. Actually, everybody's taller than me, and I was thrown out of the press conference. So the question, this is the story. So the question is that activism, as we were accused of, or was I just doing my job? I think I was just doing my job. Should we confront people who are telling lies about our community, who are saying racist things about our community? I think we have to do that. So that's my point of view. So.
Yeah, well, look, I agree. You were doing your job. So just to put that on the record, you were clearly not being an activist, you were being a journalist. I think absolutely at the core of the mission of journalism is to hold power to account. I think that is what we have to do. That's why we actually have the First Amendment. That's what the founders were thinking of at the time, is that they felt there was a need to have an institution outside of government that would be examining and checking on and holding power to account. And so, because if we don't, look, I think that's what I did with regard to the Catholic Church in Boston, is that there was when there was credible evidence of grave wrongdoing on the part of what was then the most powerful institution in New England, we had an absolute obligation to investigate that. And so we did, and we needed to ask the questions. In our case, the church didn't answer our questions. We actually wanted to interview the cardinal, and then they told us they weren't going to give us an interview, and they didn't even want to know what our questions were. So we published.
Were you being accused of being an activist?
Well, we were afraid that many of because Boston's a big Catholic community, and we were concerned that people would think that we were anti-Catholic because the Catholic Church had previously accused the Boston Globe of being anti-Catholic, and that is usually what it does when you run stories that are critical of the church. But as it turned out, our work was so well documented that people could see exactly how the church had betrayed its parishioners and its principles. And they didn't view us as betraying the church. They viewed the hierarchy of the church as betraying the principles and the parishioners. And so the reaction was universally against the church itself, the church hierarchy, because it had simply lied about that when it said it took priests out of ministry, it just moved them to another parish where they abused again and again and again. And so, but that's the duty, is to hold an institution, a powerful institution, accountable. And the bigger the institution, and the bigger the wrongdoing, the grave wrongdoing, you have a greater obligation when it's a bigger institution, because those institutions can do more wrong, and they can have the power to cover it up.
Give us just a moment. So Marty and I, we've been discussing about objectivity and neutrality. Should we, as journalists, be neutral? You've been defending objectivity throughout all your career.
Yeah, but I don't define it as being neutral. That's the thing.
So tell me what you think about objectivity, and I'll tell you about neutrality. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. All right. So I see objectivity, first of all, there's a concept that goes back over 100 years. And the idea is that, look, all of us have our preconceptions, we have our biases, we have our own life experiences that shape how we think. But when we are going out and reporting, we need to recognize that sometimes our preconceptions can get in the way of our reporting. And so as best we can, we need to set those aside and really look at the evidence, look at all the documents, talk to all of the relevant people, do a really thorough, rigorous, comprehensive job. Do it honestly and honorably and fairly and accurately. And then when you've done all that work, you tell people what you found, because the whole idea of objectivity is, what is the best method for getting at the truth? How do we best find the facts, put them in proper context, and tell people, truth is a big word, as we know, but tell people the truth. But also recognizing that there are limitations to what we know. At any one moment, I used this example in the class earlier today, is that often we're just looking at the world through a keyhole. We don't see everything. We don't know everything. We need to, sometimes we can swing the door open a bit, we see a bit more. Sometimes we can swing the door completely open and see the whole thing, if we're lucky and if we have the skill to do that. But that takes time, and we have to have some humility about what we know. But the whole idea is to get at the truth, tell people what we found, not hide it. It's not false equivalence, it's not false balance, it's not neutrality. It is, let's just go into this with an open mind as best we can and see what the evidence shows us, and let the evidence guide us to the story that we're going to publish.
So I agree with objectivity. I mean, if 17 people died, I think we have to report 17. If something is red, I think we have to say that it's red. My point is that sometimes as a journalist, you cannot remain neutral. That's what I believe. Sometimes I think you have to take a stand. And I've identified, you have other set of standards, but I've identified 7 instances in which you cannot remain neutral as a journalist. Might be controversial, but that's what I believe. I think when it comes to racism, discrimination, corruption, public lies, the violation of human rights, dictatorships, and the destruction of the environment, I think you have to take a stand. And if you don't take a stand, then you're not doing your job. So, once I had the opportunity to talk with Bishop Desmond Tutu, who worked with Nelson Mandela against apartheid in South Africa, and I was asking him about neutrality, and he said, well, if you're neutral when it comes to an injustice, then there's a problem with neutrality. He said, if an elephant puts his leg on the tail of a mouse, the mouse is not going to appreciate your neutrality. So sometimes, Maria, I don't know what you think. Sometimes I think you have to take a stand. You've done it.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I actually, if I only had a book here, I would read you the epilogue where I actually lay out what I consider to be the core principles that that objectivity doesn't mean that we don't have core principles as journalists. We are not amoral. We should know the difference between what is right and what is wrong. We should believe in democracy. We're opposed to violence. We're opposed to discrimination and we're opposed to intolerance. We are opposed to abuses of power, which is something that I've dedicated my career to, is exposing abuses of power. So those are all things that we, and by the way, and one of the things that we always need to do is listen to the voice of people who don't have power, which is what we did in the case of the Catholic Church, people whose voices were not being heard, not by law enforcement, certainly not by the church, not by law enforcement, not by politicians, and by the way, not by the press until that point. And so we have an absolute duty to do that. And so, so when I talk about objectivity, I don't mean we're going to be amoral. I don't mean that we're not going to have principles. We do have principles. I just want to, sometimes our assumptions are wrong. That's the thing. If you know somebody else, and sometimes you make assumptions about that person's life, and then as you learn a little bit more, you know that you were completely wrong about that person's life. You just didn't know enough about that person's life. And that's part of our job as journalists, is to really dig deep, to really understand everybody in our communities, you know? I mean, I think that we really need to understand the perspectives of Latinos in our communities, of people who come from other countries, people who come from, lower income backgrounds, you name it. Everybody in the country, in our communities, we need to sort of really listen to what they have to say. And I believe that as a profession, we should do a lot more listening than talking. So that's where I'm coming from.
So, not all the time. We'll give you back the debate just a second. But I think sometimes it's not a matter of just presenting two sides, because I think it is valid to have a point of view. For instance, I had an interview with Nicolás Maduro. My question is it the same to interview a dictator than to talk with political prisoners of Venezuela, or those who have fled the country? I think it's a different interview. I think it's a different interview when you have a dictator than when you have a victim of his dictatorship. And I think that point of view has to be represented in journalism.
Oh, of course. I mean, an interview with somebody who has power versus somebody who doesn't have power is a completely different thing, no question.
Now, let's try to be objective now with what's happening, especially at the end of before you retired from Univision, before you retired from the Washington Post. 2015 was a crucial, an important year for you too. Jorge, you were known by every Spanish-speaking person, I would say, in the world. But not many people in the English-speaking world knew about you until that event with Donald Trump, right? When you were ejected in Iowa, Dubuque, everybody knew about that event. Marty, when right after you finished, while you were the executive editor of the Washington Post and Trump was in his first administration, you have a secret meeting with Donald Trump, Melania, and Jeff Bezos in the White House. Nobody knew about that meeting. And then we all knew what happened at the end of your career as a full-time anchor in Univision, Jorge, when suddenly Univision decided to have an interview with Donald Trump and they never told you about it. Before going to the details of those two things, you two decided to be vocal about your stance through other channels. You wrote a book and told about it in the book. You wrote in Substack a personal column, and you wrote your stance against what happened in Univision. So tell us about your decision of when you decided to take a stance and not using the, let's say, your employer at that time.
All right, so sometimes you have to take a stand. And I believe when you're doing not all the time we have the opportunity to talk with someone really powerful. And when you have that opportunity, it's a rare opportunity. It only happens a few times during my career, and I'm sure it only happens a few times in your career. So I have two rules when I have the opportunity to talk with someone powerful. The first one is that I'm assuming that if I don't ask the tough questions, nobody else is going to do it after me. In other words, I cannot say, well, I'm not going to ask that question because I feel uncomfortable, or this person is going to feel uncomfortable, or because someone else is going to do it after me. The second rule is that I'm assuming that I will never talk to that person again. And if you do that, it's a different interview, because I'm not asking for access all the time. I'm not asking for the possibility of just doing another interview. I'm just assuming that that would be the last chance that I have to talk to someone. And if you do that, it might not be the best thing for a company or because many people and many companies might want to have access to powerful people. But if you have that opportunity, I would take it. And that's a different interview than if you're assuming that you'll go back and talk to that person again.
So mine's very different. I mean, I wasn't working anymore at the Washington Post. I had retired in February of 2021. I wanted to tell about my experience as editor of the Washington Post at I think a critical moment in history, which involved Jeff Bezos, one of the richest people in the world, acquiring an iconic newspaper, and Donald Trump, at first a presidential candidate unlike any we'd ever seen before, and then a president unlike any we'd ever seen before, arriving on the scene, and how I, as an editor, dealt with that set of circumstances, which really was historic. And if I didn't tell that story would really never be known. So while that was ongoing, I always had in my head that I'm living through history here, and someday I might actually want to tell this story, and maybe this story should be told for the sake of history. And so when I did retire, I gave myself 2 weeks to apply for Medicare and Social Security and figure out that convoluted system. It really takes some time, and change get a new computer, and fret that I wasn't going to have the help of the tech team at the Washington Post anymore, and I'd be on hours with Apple support or something like that. So, but after 2 weeks, I started working on the book and wrote a proposal. And after about 8 drafts of that proposal, it got accepted, and then it took me 2 years to write the book, and then I spent another year promoting it and describing really what happened. But I've been actually more vocal more recently, because I've been very concerned and disturbed by the behavior of Jeff Bezos as owner in more recent times. And
you actually criticize him because he personally was vocal when the paper canceled the endorsement to Kamala Harris.
There was a series of events. I mean, I first criticized him when they decided not to endorse for president for essentially the first time in almost 50 years, with one exception, and announced that decision only 11 days before the election. And I said that it was cowardly and spineless. And I put that on X, which I don't like to participate in, but I put it on there anyway. And it got a lot of attention, but subsequent to that, Amazon made a $1 million donation to the inauguration. Subsequent to that, Bezos made a pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago, met with Trump over dinner. During that dinner, he had conversation with Melania. Melania was doing a so-called documentary about herself. You can be sure it'll be fully independent. I guarantee you it's going to be totally independent. I don't know that there's even a word. You can't even call it a documentary. You got to call it. There's got to be an invention of a new word to describe that sort of thing. But anyway, so 2 weeks after that dinner, Amazon bought the rights for $40 million to that so-called documentary, and that's money in the pocket of Melania Trump. And that was, by the way, almost 3 times the amount offered by the next highest bidder. 3 times, almost 3 times. Subsequent to that, Bezos appeared on the podium during the inauguration ceremony as if he and all the other tech executives there were like a trophy for Donald Trump. That was a bad look for the Washington Post, which, by the way, declares itself to be an independent newspaper. And then more recently, suddenly Amazon was interested in acquiring the rights to The Apprentice, the TV show that starred Donald Trump, and which he undoubtedly has rights in. And so that would be money directly into the pocket of Donald Trump. And so fortunately, the newsroom of the Post continues to do really excellent work every single day. Revelatory stories, investigative pieces. I totally admire what they're doing, and I applaud it. They've been given Bezos never interfered in the news coverage when I was there, and I don't believe he's interfering now, and I've never heard of any interference whatsoever. And it's evident from the work they're doing that they have their independence. And there continue to be columnists there who are writing critical pieces, and they have editorials that are critical of Trump. More recently, I was particularly concerned about Bezos' decision. He said that, he wanted the opinion section to really be guided by two principles, free markets and personal liberties, and that everything had to fit that ideology, which is his own personal ideology. And I said at the time that I thought that was fundamentally undemocratic, and because the opinion section should carry a wide variety of opinions. We should hear from all people, from the left to the right, in between, all of that. And so I criticized him for that. And my concern is that it's damaged the reputation of the Washington Post in a bad way, and it had financial consequences for them because a lot of subscribers have left. But I still praise the work they're doing, but I think that he is, more recently, has really hurt the reputation of the paper.
Just a quick comment. I mean, what he's talking about is a relationship with power. How should we as journalists have this relationship with power? And I think doctors save lives, and architects and engineers, they build beautiful structures, and our job is to ask tough questions and do follow-ups. There's a beautiful word in Spanish called contrapoder. And then
that was the name of your podcast.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, help me with the translation, but contrapoder en inglés no suena exactamente igual. I think if you, as a journalist, always be in this position of being contrapoder, it doesn't matter right or left, I think you're doing your job. When in doubt, when you don't know what to do, if you're always in contrapoder, I think you would be fine. And that's a pretty good rule.
And there is something that also it's going on since 2009, not quite long ago. I mean, the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, started to boom. So there were other channels for journalists to take a stance and be vocal on some of their positions. So talking about the collision with power, still in the name of the book of Marty that I highly recommend. All the details of the secret meeting of Trump and Marty and Jeff Bezos is in the prologue of that book.
Yeah.
And
Frente al Poder.
Frente al Poder in Español.
In Spain, so if you can get a hold of it.
Only since 2009, we had all these platforms gaining so much power. So why can you tell us and the audience, how do you feel in your career, that shift of power, the influence of media, some people call legacy media, some people call traditional media, has been diminished, even denigrated by the rise of the power of the social media platforms. Tell us about your experience with it from 2009 till here. I remember reading one of your columns, Jorge, in which you said that you were surprised by how many people were watching you on YouTube compared with Univision numbers. So that shift of power has really affected your career, everybody's career. So
yeah, there was a time when people used to get their news from newscasts and from newspapers and from radio. That doesn't happen anymore. And everything's shifting towards social media, streaming services, podcasts. I don't know if you've seen me selling una medicina que cura la diabetes. Yeah, it's not me.
It's AI, right?
Yeah, so there, I mean, it's not only one ad in which supposedly I'm there. There are many, many ads. The latest one just happened a couple of months ago. There's supposed to be almost a magician, a doctor in Mexico City, who said that I had diabetes, and then that I drank his pócima, and I was suddenly saved. Fortunately, I don't have diabetes. But the problem is that it was so well done that sometimes you might notice a difference between the movement of my lips and my words. But in just a few months, and that's my concern, in just a few months, thanks to artificial intelligence, you might not be able to notice if that person selling a diabetes drug or selling, this is horrible, They say in the ad, I'm saying that if you send me your bank account number, that the government will be sending you $15,000. There's others that I cannot even mention about pills for the energy. You know what kind of energy? So here I am, supposedly I've never done an ad, and here I am supposed to have all this credibility in selling pills and selling funds from the government and diabetes, and that's a problem. It's a matter of credibility. What's going to happen in 6 months if you see me selling all these drugs, and you say, Jorge, yo te vi anunciando esto, no? And I've been getting all kinds of calls from friends and not so good friends telling me where to get this drug from the Mexican doctor. And that's, I know it sounds funny, might be funny. Attorneys cannot find out exactly who's done it, but the problem is that it's affecting the credibility of a journalist.
I was hoping it was true. Oh my gosh. I need a couple of curas milagrosas.
I know.
Look, I mean, I think obviously the social media really grew up in 2007, 2008, 2009. It really became dominant. I think what it's created is enormous fragmentation in the media market. You know, there's a lot of people say, oh, it's all of the big media companies. Big media companies is not the story. The issue is fragmentation. It's that right now, anybody can go to some site that confirms or affirms their pre-existing point of view. And not just a point of view, but will spread so-called facts that they think are facts. And we have, as a result, you know, we have people living in their own bubbles, and we have a situation in our society today where we can't even agree on a common set of facts. How do you run a society when you can't agree on a common set of facts? And, you know, there was a senator who passed away, senator from New York, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, used to say, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And people now believe, no, I am entitled to my own facts. And they have their own facts, whether they're facts or not. I mean, facts in quotes. And so, you know, and now we can't agree on a common set of facts. And it's worse than that, because we can't even agree on how to determine what a fact is. And because all of the elements that we have used for that in the past have been devalued. So things like education, what you're getting here. Things like expertise, what you acquire over the course of your career. Things like experience, what you have felt, or you know, that you have some experience with something. And then finally, above all, actual evidence, what you can see with your own eyes, what you can hear with your own ears, and people deny that as well. That's the example of January 6th, you know. This was not, as Republicans described it, a normal tourist visit. I've never received a brochure for a visit of that sort. I have to say, you know, I've seen many tourist brochures, but nothing that says, come, just, you know, barge into the Congress and rip the place up and try to obstruct the results of an election. So, and beat up some cops while you're at it. Nobody offered that to me. So this is what, you know, this is where we are, and that's a very dangerous place to be, not just for journalism, but even more importantly for democracy and human progress. How do you make human progress when you cannot agree on a common set of facts? And that is the result of this enormous fragmentation in the media market, which includes a lot of social media and other platforms and what have you, and people getting information off of whether it's TikTok or YouTube or Reddit or whatever it might be, or Instagram or wherever it might be, but somewhere. And that's a challenge for all of us in media, that's for sure.
And I think in an era of misinformation, disinformation, and authoritarianism, I think journalism is more important than ever.
Yes.
Because even though there's a problem with credibility with many journalists and influencers, what we do is incredibly important nowadays, especially when democracy is being threatened in this country.
Before we go to the questions from the public, Jorge, you decided to retire from Univision shortly after Univision did this interview with Donald Trump. And there are not many people understand what happened, what went into your mind when that interview, that soft interview, happened. Were you aware of that interview? Why don't you give the audience what happened and why did you decide to retire?
Well, I mean, I had been working 38 years for the company, and for 38 years we agreed on almost everything. On year 39, we simply did not. And we've talked about my philosophy with when it comes to important interviews. And I truly believe that if you have the opportunity to have an interview with someone with power, you have to ask tough questions, you have to do follow-ups, and you have to make sure that that facts are included in those interviews. Not only points of view, and that's on one hand. On the other, we know what's been happening lately. There's a shift on where people are getting their news. And I just might be retiring from a company, but I'm not retiring as a journalist. I cannot tell you yet exactly what I'm going to be doing, but I'm working on something different. So it's got to be something related with podcasts, with streaming services. But I mean, I honestly don't know any single journalist who really can retire. I think Gabriel Garcia Marquez was right when he said that this is the most beautiful profession in the world, and it is. And I intend to continue being an independent journalist, but still being a journalist.
Yes. And you two will always be remembered for the stamina you put on the profession, and especially in tough times. So before going to the public, why don't you give us in a few words the message that you just mentioned, the message of journalism never stop, and it's something that we have in our blood. But at the same time, with all this dissemination of information, what a short message to the crowd here about the how to battle and how to retaliate the current tough times. I'm not going to ask your relationship with Trump because we all know, but specifically with the current administration, what is the message for journalists? Some of here in the crowd have told me that they feel like this is the end of the world for their profession. I think it's the opposite, but you guys.
No. I don't know if you want to go ahead, Marty, but I think our role is simply to question, to challenge those who are in power. I think we have two responsibilities. The first one, as we've said, we have to report reality as it is, not as we wish it would be. That's very important. And I truly believe that two journalists covering an election or a hurricane or an accident could cover that pretty much the same way. But the second most important one, and that's why sometimes people have doubts about what we do, is that I truly believe that if we don't question those who are in power, then people feel that we're not doing our job. And that's incredibly important. Let me finish just with something about credibility. As you know, we have hurricane seasons all the time in Miami, and I believe in two meteorologists who are telling me June, July, September, August, if I have to evacuate my house or not, and what to do with my family. I think our role as journalists is precisely that, making sure that people trust in facts, that people believe in what you say, and my motto lately is quite simple. When in doubt, more journalism.
Marty?
Well, I think anybody who decides that they want to get into journalism should think hard first about what their core principles are. What do they really believe? Who are they as a person, and what will they stand for? We were talking about that earlier. I think it's very important to make sure that you're completely dedicated to the mission of journalism, which is to give the public the information that it needs and deserves to know, with a special scrutiny on the people who hold power and exercise authority over ordinary people. And that's number one. Number two is that we have to, if we expect to earn the confidence of the public, we have to uphold for ourselves the highest possible standards, always, and behave in the most professional manner possible, we cannot waver from that. And then finally, is to recognize that our field is going to change. We were just talking about the kinds of changes that have taken place. We are going to have to communicate. We will be communicating differently than the way we communicate today. And so anybody who gets into the profession needs to recognize that things are going to change every half dozen years or fewer. And that I always tell people who want to get into the field now, you need to get comfortable with discomfort because it's always going to be uncomfortable. Instability is going to be part of our profession. It's just the nature of things. We're much more like a tech industry these days. And learn to adapt, learn to embrace those changes, learn to communicate in the ways that are most effective. And those three things, I think, will serve you really well over a long period of time. A total dedication to our mission, upholding the highest possible standards for yourself, and then being willing to embrace change. So that's my advice.
Thank you.
And something really important on this is that either you're a journalist or not a journalist, it doesn't matter. Silence is not an option nowadays. Mm-hmm. Silence is not an option. Esta no es una profesión para silenciosos. And in a moment like this, I think journalism is needed more than ever before.
And I hope you get the message over here from two special guests who flourished in times of really rough situations that I try to compile during their careers. We need more heroes like these two. And these are the times where heroes are built. Okay, so this is the moment for there are two selected students, right? Two? Who I'm gonna ask some questions. They're being spoiled, not spoiled, they were selected for a reason. So please come on.
And we don't know the questions, by the way, eh?
Yeah, hola.
That's something you should never do. Never, ever give the questions.
It's me again. Muchas gracias por la conversación, por su advice. It's been great hearing from both of you. I feel very inspired. So I had these questions prepared, but last minute I was like, I'm just gonna ask something else. So I wanted to ask you, and this goes for both of you. So I wanted to ask, right now we live in very uncertain times for journalists, and I think that calls for innovation, for change, but you too have a lot of advice, have a lot of experience in different roles. So I just wanted to ask you, what is the change that you want to see in the next generation of journalists, and what advice do you have for them?
Well, a lot, what I was saying earlier is that I think the change is going to be that, look, technology is going to disrupt how we do our work. That's just a fact. It already has. 3 years ago, nobody was talking about generative AI. Now, that's all anybody talks about. It's remarkable to me that we haven't talked about it here today, so I'm bringing it up. But but everywhere I go now, people want to talk about Gen AI. And that's going to have a dramatic impact on our profession. We're going to see, it's going to make things worse because we're going to see visual images that are fake, audio that's fake. This will be more difficult to detect, more difficult to refute. That is a huge challenge. It wasn't that long ago that we didn't have TikTok, believe it or not. I long for those days. But But we didn't have TikTok, and yet it's changed. It disrupted everybody else, including the big platforms. So let's recognize that technological change is just going to be part of our lives as journalists, and we need to know how to seize on that opportunity, and how do we communicate better using that? How do we use these tools for our advantage rather than being sort of beaten down by this new technology? And so that's what I would recommend is, adapt to change, embrace change in a disciplined way, in a timely way, but also in a very principled way with a real dedication to our core values as journalists, which means fundamental to that is verification. We have verified the information that we are communicating.
And what I find really interesting is that your generation, this is the first generation in which the younger generation knows how to use the tools of journalism better than we do. You can handle this phone much better than I do. And use it, take it to your advantage. we've been saying it throughout the whole day, but use your voice. You have a strong voice. We've been using ours for a long, long time. Now is your time to do that. Es un relevo. Nosotros ya hemos hablado, lo hemos hecho durante mucho tiempo. Ahora les toca a ustedes. It's a heavy weight, especially first generation, especially if you're Latinos. But now is your turn. I still have a few more years, but just a few more years. Not too many, but now is going to be your turn. So you have this incredible opportunity to use your voice through this phone. So use it. No les tengan miedo.
Good evening, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Isaías, soy un estudiante de periodismo. Jorge, first off, I just want to apologize. I texted you in 2015, so. But the question that I have is...
Don't worry, he didn't give jobs to anybody, apparently, so...
I'm going to stalk you by the door and ask for that job.
Single you out for not giving you a job. He didn't give jobs to any of those people.
Excellent. Question for both of you. How do you guys stay grounded, motivated, especially in such a demanding field?
Well, I mean, remember what I told you right at the beginning. I came from Mexico because Mexico was not a democracy and there was not freedom of the press. So I'm not willing to go through that again. I find journalism, it's an incredible profession that allows you to be young and a rebel throughout your whole life. And once you embrace it, you'll always love it. We truly enjoy what we do. It's not, we don't see it as, at least I don't see it as a job that I have to go to every single day. And I'm hopeful, maybe because I'm an immigrant, but this country gave me the opportunities that my country of origin couldn't give me. I've spoken with complete freedom throughout 40 years here, and I expect just to continue doing that. And I think we, as a country, we're much, much stronger than just one person, and we're going to show that. No?
So there's a, oh, go ahead.
Okay, so every day when I do basic errands, I think to myself, Donald Trump doesn't do this. If I make my bed in the morning, I think to myself, believe it or not, I do, because I guess I can't get him out of my head. But I make the bed and I go, Donald Trump doesn't make his own bed. He probably never has, except when he was in military school. So when he was required to do so. But other than that, he doesn't do it. When I go get my groceries, I bet he never gets his groceries. He doesn't know what the price of eggs is, or the price of anything. So, when I do my laundry, it's like Donald Trump doesn't do his laundry. I'm doing my laundry like any ordinary person, right? And I tend to hang out with normal people, regular people. And I have never, even despite holding these positions, I've never, absolutely never tried to make friends with anybody in power, not at all. With politicians in Washington, I don't have any friends among politicians in power. And so it's not because I don't necessarily like this one or that one. I don't even know them that well, but it's not my job. I have a professional relationship with them, not a personal relationship with them. I have good friends who who've been my friends since the time I got into journalism. From the very first job that I had, they're still friends. And they all do different things, and people live ordinary lives. And so I try to ground myself. I never ask for any special privileges, ever, for anything. And it's that's how I try to stay grounded. I try to see what people are living and what their lives are like, and live my life as a normal person and hang out with normal people. That's it, basically.
Marty, and your ordinary life ended a little bit with the movie Spotlight, right? Because everybody watched the movie Spotlight. He was personified as the editor of the Boston Globe. Your life changed that after that.
It was a little out of my control. I didn't make that movie.
You won an Oscar.
I didn't win an Oscar. The movie won an Oscar. It won 2 Oscars, by the way. And one was for the Best Picture of the year. So, but I don't take any credit for that, I got to be portrayed by a guy who's 4 inches taller than I am, better looking, stays in much better shape. And so when people hear my name, they think of him. It's great, you know? I mean, couldn't be better. But yeah, and people notice me, not that many, but people do notice me and bring it up. But it hasn't changed my life. I don't hang out with Hollywood celebrities, by the way. I mean, I do know Liev Schreiber, but we don't hang out together, and we have a good relationship, and I've seen him like every 9 months or 10 months or 12 months or something like that, some occasion to chat with him, and maybe by email. But other than that, you know, not much. And so, but yeah, the movie had an impact in a way that I didn't really anticipate, and I certainly never anticipated there would even be a movie where I was portrayed. But that has not changed. That has not fundamentally changed my life. I mean, what it's given me, I think, which is great, is a platform where I can talk about the things that I believe in, about the important role of journalism, about the important role of investigative journalism, and most essentially, the importance of listening to people who don't have any power because they have powerful things to say.
There is a question from the public, right? Yeah, it says, como periodistas, especialmente en la frontera, ¿cómo podemos asegurarnos de que estamos yendo más allá de cubrir una nota y poder ayudar a la comunidad, especialmente en estos momentos y en el tema de inmigración?
Bueno, somos storytellers, ¿no? Estamos contando la historia. Lo importante es que contemos nuestra historia, que entendamos la importancia que nosotros tenemos en este país, y que si ustedes no cuentan nuestra historia, nadie la va a poder contar exactamente con nosotros. Estamos en un momento muy difícil de deportaciones, de separaciones de familias, y si no contamos nuestra propia historia, nadie lo va a hacer como nosotros. Así que cada uno de ustedes tiene una historia familiar que puede contar, pero cada uno de ustedes también tienen muchas otras historias que conocen y que tenemos la obligación de que conozcan. People have to know that we're not terrorists, that we're not criminals, that we're not racists, that the vast majority of the Latino community and the immigrant community son gente decente, gente que viene aquí a trabajar. So we have to insist on that story, because if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it for us.
Yes. Marty, go back to your executive editor position, and what would be your instruction to your border reporter?
Sorry, to what?
Your instructions to your border, the reporter who covers the border, if he is thinking what I just read.
Okay, porque tenemos la obligación de cubrir las vidas de toda la gente, de gente en cada rincón de la comunidad, la gente al otro lado de la frontera. Tenemos la obligación de entender sus preocupaciones, sus expectativas, sus esperanzas. Y somos los periodistas. Nosotros somos un puente entre personas de una comunidad y personas de otras comunidades. Entonces tenemos la obligación de darle al público una información sobre sus vidas y darle al público un sentido de su humanidad, para que todo el pueblo, para todos los estadounidenses entiendan que son solamente seres humanos, que están buscando una manera de mejorar su vida.
If I may, just I was thinking again about the question, what gives me hope? And this is what gives me hope. We criticize the government, we criticize the president, and we're still here. We're going home, and we can do it. So we have to continue doing that, because this is the United States. That's why I've learned to love this country. This country has given me so many different opportunities. So this gives me hope, and we have to continue doing that throughout the country.
All right, so let's go back. Let's go to the questions from the public. I know, Nicole, are you coordinating that? Okay. That's it?
Se asustaron, nadie quiere preguntar ahora.
Aquí,
Ya.
allá.
Da miedo preguntar a veces.
Jorge,
es
buenas
normal,
noches. Buenas noches, Jorge. Buenas
Remember,
noches.
go to the question directly, because
Sí.
we
Buenas
don't
noches,
have
Mari,
much
y
time.
saludos a toda la gente. Represento a Contacto Total, un medio que ha estado 20 años diciéndole la verdad a la gente aquí en Arizona, en radio, en revista. Mi pregunta es, este gobierno de Trump apenas empieza, no tenemos ni siquiera 3 meses. ¿Qué debe llevar un periodista, un verdadero periodista en su maleta para cubrir estos 4 años con la verdad sin fallar en el intento? Yo lo primero que llevaría sería valentía. ¿Ustedes qué llevarían para cubrir a Trump durante estos 4 años?
Bueno, a ver, la verdad es que sí da miedo, ¿no? Y todos conocemos personas que están aquí sin documentos. Originalmente estamos hablando de 11 millones, quizás estamos hablando de 14 millones, y que desde mi punto de vista tienen el derecho de quedarse en los Estados Unidos y tener un camino a la ciudadanía. Y lo que estamos obligados es, muchas veces, y yo sé que es difícil, es vencer ese miedo, pero ese miedo no siempre es fácil. Pero para eso estamos de nuevo, no es una profesión para silenciosos, el silencio no es una opción y estamos obligados a seguir contando nuestras historias. Valentía, hay que tener valentía para hablar en estos tiempos, no queda la menor duda, sin la menor duda.
Okay. There's two more questions. I'm sorry, but we need to leave. Go ahead. You had on this side. Okay. I'll help you.
Nosotros no necesitamos micrófono, ¿no?
Bueno, buenas tardes, soy Beatriz Limón, soy una periodista veterana, ustedes sabrán de eso. Mi pregunta es referente a los momentos que estamos viviendo actualmente en cuanto a lo que uno está sintiendo como periodista, ¿no? Me refiero a la salud emocional de nosotros, porque nunca me ha tocado vivir un momento tan duro. Ahorita estoy trabajando mira, se me quiebra la voz porque la verdad ha sido muy difícil, con estudiantes que, bueno, tienen un temor muy latente de, pues, perder su espacio aquí en las universidades y, pues, se supone que los jóvenes son los idealistas, los que construyen, y no he encontrado a nadie que quiera hablar por temor. Tienen mucho temor a las represalias, igual a los maestros de aquí de las universidades, y nunca me ha tocado, en más de mis 25 años como periodista, haber visto esto, ¿no? Entonces, también es como un desaliento de nuestra comunidad. Y yo les pregunto, ¿qué se puede hacer para que nosotros los periodistas podamos salir a cubrir sin sentir que el corazón se te está partiendo y sin poner en riesgo nuestra salud emocional?
No, a ver, lo que pasa es que el corazón se nos está rompiendo y hay que reportar con el corazón roto. Y así, con ese corazón roto y con lo que estamos viviendo, esto es precisamente lo que tenemos que reportar. Ese miedo al que tú te refieres, eso es exactamente lo que tenemos que reportar. La separación de familias, eso es lo que tenemos que reportar. Las deportaciones masivas, las acusaciones falsas que hacen en contra de nosotros, eso es precisamente lo que tenemos que reportar. Me ha tocado cubrir 7 guerras y las 7 veces voy muerto de miedo. Y aún así hay que reportarlo. Eso es lo que nos toca como reporteros y no reporteros. Así que estamos viviendo un momento difícil, pero para eso es precisamente el periodismo, para reportar, particularmente en momentos de crisis como este. Pero, ¿qué recomiendas, Marty? ¿Cómo se reporta con miedo?
Bueno, yo creo que has contestado bien la pregunta, entonces no tengo más que decir, yo creo.
Okay, just one more question we have here.
Primeramente, un gusto, ¿verdad? Un placer estar escuchando de usted. Yo soy de Nicaragua y precisamente una persecución política fue la que me trajo aquí. Así que me siento muy identificada, ¿verdad?, con su historia, con su trabajo y con lo que tiene que decir, ¿verdad?, al pueblo latino en general. Y pues viendo en la administración actual tantos signos, tantas acciones en tan poco tiempo, para una persona que viene huyendo de una dictadura, pues es alarmante, me genera preocupación, ¿verdad? Pero usted que se ha sentado cara a cara con dictadores, con gente de poder, que ya los conoce bien, ¿verdad? Conoce los signos. ¿Qué nos espera en esta administración actual? ¿Qué nos espera a nosotros específicamente como latinos, como personas exiliadas, ¿verdad? Sobre todo, que vienen huyendo también de inestabilidad política y ahora nos encontramos en un ambiente que se ve confuso. ¿Qué nos espera a nosotros, ¿verdad? Según su experiencia.
Yo creo que eres más capaz de responder.
Nos esperan, a ver, hay que decir la verdad, nos esperan tiempos muy difíciles, muy, muy difíciles, que ya los estamos viviendo. Hablaste de Nicaragua, tuve la oportunidad de hablar con Daniel Ortega antes de que Nicaragua terminara siendo una dictadura, y me ha tocado hablar con Nicolás Maduro y con Hugo Chávez y con Fidel Castro, y son momentos sumamente difíciles. Yo no espero que esto ocurra en los Estados Unidos, porque creo que como un país somos mucho más fuertes que una sola persona y que nunca vamos a permitir que eso ocurra aquí. Pero para la comunidad latina hay que decirles la verdad. Yo llevo desde 1983 aquí en este país y nunca me había tocado vivir algo así. Nunca me había tocado palpar este miedo en la comunidad de esta misma forma. Y aún así estoy absolutamente convencido de que vamos a salir adelante y que este no es el futuro. Estaba hablando con una maestra que me decía, en el año 2045 todos, absolutamente todos en este país vamos a ser minoría. Es decir, el país se ve como nosotros. Esto es realmente los Estados Unidos, un país diverso, interracial, multicultural, donde somos de todos lados, y a la larga este es el país. Lo que estamos viendo actualmente es una resistencia a esos cambios, pero esto es inevitable. La demografía va a determinar exactamente hacia dónde vamos, así que entiendo el miedo que sienten muchos de ustedes, entiendo la ansiedad que están viviendo muchos de ustedes, pero estoy absolutamente convencido de que vamos a salir adelante. Pero podemos salir adelante si no nos quedamos callados, si no aceptamos que estas cosas pasen. Así que no quiero tirar más rollos, pero hay que contarnos y decirnos la verdad, y sobre todo contar nuestras propias historias.
Yes. Well, and I will add to what Jorge just said. Economically speaking, I'm a media owner, so I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm leading also conversations with advertisers who are even saying we have to stop advertising in Spanish temporarily. Well, my answer yesterday to one was, even if they deport 2 million people tomorrow, we still have a very solid and a strong economic engine in this country. And if somebody owns a business and wants to grow, there's no way they have blind eyes to the Hispanic community. So thank you so much, everybody, for being nice.
Gracias.
And for our great guest. Thank you so much.